I'm Dan Forey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the school district. I'm also the school board secretary, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that role looks. First, I want to thank you all for coming out. I think as we try and get some of the information out, I think as there's quite a selection of opportunities this evening just to see what's going on and understand. And if you're interested, I guess next session in here, they're talking about math. And so if you have any kids in school right now and figure out why they're doing math differently, that's the one to come to. I might stay for that too. Because I'm a math major and I got to figure that out. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and I have a couple slides and then I'd love to answer questions. So just to explain a little bit, we have a school board. School board has 9 members. One of the things that Pennsylvania School Boards Association highlights is that those 9 members are really operate as a group. They make decisions as a board, and individually they don't have authority to make decisions with regard to school operations, with regard to policies. And somewhat, that's a little different when some people start talking about, well, state representatives or things like that, or hey, they have a specific role. But for boards and for school boards across the Pennsylvania, it really is that operating as that group of 9. And so that's just something to keep in mind as we move forward. So I mentioned I am also the school board secretary, and so what we have is we have 9 elected school board members. We have a president, a vice president, and then we have a board secretary, which I fill that role, and I'm actually an administrator here in the district. So that's a collateral duty that I have to make sure that we follow all the processes and the regulations along that way. We also have a employee who serves as the treasurer of the board, and it depends on the size of the district. Sometimes those are elected board members that fill those roles, depending on how large the size of the district is. So there's a couple things that the board's responsible for. They're responsible for the policies that govern the operations. And that's probably similar to almost any board type operation in any configuration. You know, whether it's a board of directors, whether it's a corporate board. In the same way, they're responsible for those policies. They're responsible for how things operate. For the Hempfield School District, if you go to our website and you look under school board, there's a whole policy manual that's all on there. It's all online to see different topics at a higher level. They also approve the annual budget. And so we're getting ready to start that process. We just finished last year's audit of our budget. We will start in December and January, starting working the preliminary budget. The board has to pass the budget by the end of June. And so they'll go through the process. What that means is by June 30th, it has to be passed, or else there's actually fines that come into play. Unlike what they went through in Harrisburg the other year, where it wasn't passed for 9 or more months, school districts still have to make some determination of what might be coming, pass that budget, and then move forward. So that's one of their other responsibilities. One of the big ones from a professional or from a personnel standpoint is they select and they evaluate the superintendent. And so they're the ones who make that decision. You'll see in the last 2 years, the state has gone forward and superintendent has goals and evaluation. That's all posted on the website. It's there, it's available to see what his goals are, how he's doing with those goals, and that report out. They also have final approval on all staffing employment. And what that looks like for a district of this size, we have about 900 full-time employees and probably 400 part-time employees. They don't go through and interview everybody. What they do is all employment is presented to them at the monthly meeting. They go through and then they will make a motion to approve and accept those employments. And one of the things that's a little different with that, and sometimes is when we hire employees, whether it's the custodian up through a teacher or through a principal, they have to be approved by the board. So we'll make a conditional offer to an employee. We'll explain to them that you are on the agenda for board approval. Please don't quit your other job or whatever else until it's officially approved, but it has to be officially approved by the board in order for that hire to be permanent. And then the last thing that hopefully you don't have a lot of experience at is the board's actually the final decision maker when it comes to school student expulsions and suspensions. And so they're the final in that process. It works through the administration, it really works with the principals on a building level. And then they actually act as a jury if someone would appeal and say, hey, I don't think that was right, I don't think things were followed. It would go to the school board in a formal hearing, and they would make that final approval. School board meetings. We as a district usually have 2 school board meetings a month. It's usually the first and the second Tuesday of the month. We'll advertise them in January for the year. They're on our calendar on the website. One of the things that we do, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but all of our meetings can be voting meetings. They can take action. Normally what will happen, as you see there, the first Tuesday is the committee of the whole. At that meeting, there'll be discussion. They'll be looking at what's up for action at the end of the next week. That's when a lot of the discussion will happen, when a lot of the reports from the different board committees will come in, and so that's a lot of the discussion is the first Tuesday. The second Tuesday is the regular voting meeting. That's where the final discussion and then most of the official action. We had an example here, just to give you an example, last month. We're doing some paving. We wanted to try and get that done before things got cold here and the plants closed up, and so they moved that paving project. They voted on in the first meeting because we didn't want to have to wait another week and try and lose that window. So it's very rare that something comes to the first meeting as a voting item, but it can be done that. There also can be special board meetings called. They have to be advertised. They have to be advertised in a paper of general circulation within 24 hours in advance. And so what that really means is we probably need to decide about 72 hours ahead, because we have to get to the paper. We have to get the paper in time for when their publication cycle is, and then be able to have it out. All of our meetings are in evening, and so as long as it occurs in the day before its paper, that gives you that 24 hours. It's interesting, that's a PA code that requires that. So regardless, we put quite a bit out on social media. We'll put things out on the website, try and communicate that, but the code still requires that 24-hour notice there. One of the things that sometimes gets questioned is, well, I heard that something was an executive session, or you may have read or seen things about a sunshine law violation. And well, why did they talk about that in one time in the public and they didn't talk about that in the public? When can that happen? And so this 65 PA is the Pennsylvania code. It really has 5 different categories. And now, as you can imagine, this is pretty simplified as to what the 5 are. I think they try and work to make sure the lawyer can help interpret it. But we'll look at these broad categories. First of all is personnel matters. And really that's similar to sort of any other place. If you have somebody that there's a discipline issue, or there's a performance issue, or you're talking about the details of either terminating or accepting a resignation, that can be held in executive session. And when the person, they decide, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to terminate, or we're going to go and take action, that'll be voted on in the public meeting. But the discussion as to the details of what happened with the person and things like that are going to be discussed in executive session. Collective bargaining. So we have all the teachers are represented in a teachers union. So there is a contract. As that process goes and you work through collective bargaining, that's one of the things that also can be discussed in executive session. Decisions about the purchase or lease of property, and what it talks about here and tries to make it clear, when you actually purchase the property, it has to be in a public meeting. But any negotiations, any discussions, because what they don't want to do is put the district in an unfavorable position where, well, if I know the school's interested, then I'm going to make an offer, and so they try and prevent so that you don't get through that negotiation process, cost the taxpayers along that line. This is only for the purchase or lease. The sale of property actually has to be discussed in the public meeting. So it just depends on the way they look at it. Consulting with an attorney, and that could be that there's current litigation that's open, or something that's potentially litigation. So the ability to come in, have an attorney, have those discussions, and understand what they need to do and go from there. And then the last one really sort of ties into the previous slide, confidential matters, and probably the most of that is related to student discipline. One of the things that we try to do from a confidentiality standpoint, even when presented to the board and we talk about individual student matters, they have a student ID, and that's all that they have. We don't talk about who the person's name is or anything else, so that the board members can look objectively, hey, here's this number, here's what was presented, and here's the action we want to take. So we try and make sure that that we can protect the students' confidentiality as much as possible there. If you guys have questions as we're going, please ask. And like I said, we'll have plenty of time in the back. So we talked about we have 2 board meetings. And if you've ever come to a board meeting, sometimes you might say, well, boy, they had all these things up there and it all went pretty quickly. Well, the reason that occurs is we have 4 committee meetings. And what we do is we have at least 2 board members in each of these committees. And they really try and work with the administration on the nuts and bolts, the gritty details of each of them. Those are also public meetings. They're advertised on the website. So the first one we talked about, one of the responsibilities of the board is policy. And so we have a board policy committee. And so rather than spending, an hour and a half in a board meeting on policy, we use the committee meeting, we work through the details, and then it gets presented to the board as a whole after that. Same thing with buildings and grounds, extracurricular, and finance. So each of those have like I said, if you look at the website, have a chairman of those. They have at least 2 board members that are involved. There are probably some administrators that participate in those meetings. They're open to the public. And so that's where a lot of the details get discussed. For instance, the buildings and grounds of finance, they meet usually on a monthly basis, and that might be a 2-hour meeting. And so, that way, that's where a lot of that gets worked out. A couple things, the bullets about each of these. They're all public meetings, as I said. They all have a time for public comment at the beginning of the meeting. They all provide the extended discussion. And really that, as we talked earlier, right, the board requires the 9 members. And so this is an opportunity for a couple of the board members to then brief the other ones on, hey, here's what we discussed, here was the details, does anyone have any questions, here's what the recommendation of that committee is. And so they do have limited authority to take any action. How is the public involved? And if you haven't been to a board meeting, you'll see that every board meeting starts out with citizens' comments. And the board policy, which I referenced there, 903, allows people to speak under 2 conditions. 1, they have to be a resident, or 2, they have to be a taxpayer. And we have, in my time, had someone show up that they wanted to talk, and well, they didn't live in the district, and they didn't own any property in the district, so they can give us a call later, but that's not a time for, it's a time for residents' comment, and they didn't fall in either of the 2 categories. Comments are always at the beginning of the meeting. If you show up that night, you have a 5-minute limit to talk about what you want to talk about. You'll state your name, who you are, so we can verify, yes, you are a resident. The board policy allows for a 10-minute limit on discussion items, and that would be if someone felt, hey, there's something going on, I feel like I need more than 5 minutes, they can petition via the policy, the board president, Mr. Otto, who's in the back there, and say, hey, this is what I want to talk about, this is why I think it should be placed on the agenda, and I'd like to have 10 minutes, and then it's up to him to review that and understand, hey, does that meet, is it part of the discussion we're having tonight, does it make sense that that's there, or do we stay to the 5-minute limit? A couple things that we've seen as people come and understand is it's really an opportunity to address the board. It's not a time for interaction, it's not a time for debate, it's, hey, here's who I am, here's my concern, here's my experience. And so rarely will there be much interaction, because part of it comes back to, well, it's the board of 9, and so for one board member to speak or to take action or answer a question, there are times where they'll refer and say, hey, have you followed up with this administrator? Can you talk to them? And they'll get back to us. There is a couple things, and you would hope that in today's environment we didn't have to have these in there, but obviously, as you all have watched the news and everything else lately, people don't quite all understand what professionalism looks like. And so even though there is a 5-minute limit to speak and to speak what you want to, we do have places in place that, if something gets personal or something, gets obscene or things like, the board president has the ability to say, look, you need to stop. That's not professional, that's not the atmosphere here, and we'll move on. One of the things that we do have on the website, and a lot of times people may come to the board meeting and, well, hey, I want this fixed, I want this done. I think that, yeah, you can read it, okay? What we try to do is say, well, who did you talk to? Because the key, and as you've probably dealt with issues on a personal level, on a professional level, the earlier you can get to the people that are impacted, the better the resolution, is more likely to come. They understand the details, they understand. And so what we've done is we have a sheet out, it's on the website with concerns. And what we try and do is help people. Some people just don't know, well, who do I talk to about that? What does it look like? I'll give you, for instance, when we talk about bus concerns, is it something with the driver or something happening there? Well, then it starts with the driver and the company and then the transportation department. If it's a student behavior on the bus, then that really ends up coming to the principal because they're responsible for the student behavior. And so it just helps to flush out, and understand, what's the process, how do we get there? Obviously, everything goes up through the superintendent and not only comes to the board, but what many times we've had folks come to the board and, hey, here's what I want to do, and whether it's Mr. Otto or whoever's the board president may say, well, have you talked to the administration? Can you start with them and work through the details, and then they'll bring us up to speed on that. That's what I had. What do you have for me? What questions do you have? Something that I didn't put in the slideshow, to be a board member, you need to be 18 years or older. You need to be a resident of the district for a year, and at that point you're eligible to be a board member. Normally what happens process-wise, board elections are off cycles from the general elections. So they'll actually start the election process usually with applying to the Republican or Democratic committee here in early February. They'll have a spring primary. We alternate between 4 and 5 members up for election every 4 years. And so this spring we have 4 that are up for election. They'll have a primary in April-May timeframe. I think it's May now because we're not in the presidential election. It got moved up this last time. And then November they'll have the election of those 4 board members. It is a volunteer role. There is no payment. It's a little different even than the townships and municipalities. There's a small stipend for a borough council person or a township supervisor, but a school board in Pennsylvania is completely a volunteer role. Questions?
What is the budget time frame?
It starts July 1. Runs July 1 to June 30th. And so, like I said, what we normally try to do is you have to present a proposed final budget in May. It has to be then published and out for the people to look at it for 20 days. And there also has to be 30 days between the votes. So like I said earlier, it has to be approved in June. And so we'll probably have as much as we can wrapped up in that May timeframe. So it can be out for public comment, public review, and then approved before the end of the June timeframe. Yeah. They would follow the processes set out there by the PA Department of Agriculture. They did vote the other year when we took the high school off the school lunch program to try and see if we could get more participation and revenue through that. They did. That was a 1-year pilot that ended, and so they're back on all K through 12 right now. Is all following the National School Lunch Program.
I thought there was like separate choices for what school lunch program that each school picked.
No, it's all comes out of the department, and then what the food services director and his staff would make sure that it's compliance with the National School Lunch Program. And we try to offer, I think, at least 2 or 3 main menu items and then some a la carte items at each of the levels. But a lot of that's pretty strictly dictated. They look at the week as a whole. What is your sodium? What is your grains? Is it a whole grain? How many ounces of protein? All that's dictated out, and how much can be served and how much can be bland. One of the things that we ran into even at the elementary level, if you have elementary students, we don't offer the salads 5 days a week because the sodium of the toppings that you could put on actually throw the sodium levels too high. So we can only offer at the elementary level salads 4 days a week. So there's a pretty tight compliance on what that looks like. Okay. And we'd also do, if you have any more questions on food services, we have a table down in the hallway, in the next hallway over, that you can talk to the director. He's out there to answer questions as well. Yep. Anything else? Well, thank you. I'll let you go.